Here's another component and another resource. Ben Moffatt.
Thank you very much, James. Okay, so I am going to hopefully be just as compassionate and amazing as Andy was. There's going to be a lot more science up here, so it's going to be a little less from the heart, a little more clinical, but I hope it still makes as much sense and sounds as reasonable as he did. Lindamood Bell has been around for just over 30 years. We're going to get into sort of who the company is, but I'm going to fast forward to what we do more. If you have questions of something that I do not talk about up on the slide, come see us. We are at the black tablecloth to the right of the tiny cute Christmas tree that we did not bring. So Lindamood Bell has locations all over. It started out in the two founders' living rooms. We've got Nancy here, Nancy Bell, and then here we've got Pat Lindamood, and that's where that name comes from. If you were going to name a company something for individuals with reading challenges, I wouldn't recommend using your own last names if they happen to be those, but that's what they chose because they built this literally in their kitchens and in their living rooms. Nancy was a reading specialist, Pat was a speech therapist, and in the mid-70s and then later in the 80s, they literally joined forces to figure out how to help struggling readers. And over that time, once they had figured out how to do it, they started backing up all their magic in science. They started having research done. They wanted to fund university studies that told them what happened inside a child's mind when they were working, because they had plenty of experiences of their own, and they had seen plenty of smiles and plenty of good stories from the parents and from the students, but they wanted to validate it. They wanted to make sure the science made sense. So what you'll see up here is that all centers are still owned, operated, and quality controlled by the original founders. Nancy still beams in over video conference to tell us how to be better, and she's great at that, and it lights a fire under everybody in every center, I promise you. So this is the belief that really started the whole thing, that children of any age, meaning adults, anybody, they can be taught to read and comprehend. It's never going to be a simple fix. It's never going to be switching a light, but it can happen. And if you don't believe that, you've sort of already lost a little bit because you have to maintain that belief that they can improve and that they can gain. So it's very important. We also believe that the key to getting success like that is its sensory cognitive functioning. And the very first sensory cognitive thing we're going to talk about is imagery. So there are three sensory cognitive functions that Lindamood Bell really believes are the underlying pieces that allow us to read, spell, do math, all of these things. Some of these you'll seem super familiar. Phonemic awareness is one I'm sure everybody's very familiar with. It's the ability to identify the sounds within a word. You know that the B says ba, you know that the D says da. Symbol imagery is a little bit more, or a little bit less well-known, but still out there. This is the ability to actually create mental representations for the letters. So that means you're actually able to visualize the B going this way while the D going that way, and notice when they're not the same. So if you've got a student who always has to throw the bed up to know which way the B or D goes, symbol imagery is something that they're a little bit weak in, or maybe a lot weak in. It will really just depend. But then concept imagery is going to be taking center stage today because I want to talk about the language and imagery connection. So concept imagery is not really that much to do with written language, but it's about being able to create an image to Gestalt, and that's our fancy word for whole, from oral or written language. That's being able to tell why and what a story was about, and not just being able to repeat every line on the page. There's a big difference from repetition and true understanding, and a lot of the students that we'll all know today are great repeaters, great parroters, but it's not the same as really understanding. And if you want a cohesive written response, you need to get Gestalt understanding. So the program I'm going to be talking about here is called Visualizing and Verbalizing, and that's the one that we did the study on. But the idea behind VV, as I'm going to start calling it to save myself a little breath, is that by stimulating sensory input for the student, meaning we talk about what do they picture for this word, what do they picture for that character, lets them monitor and maybe even self-correct when they're not matching. So if they're misunderstanding a story, maybe they understood only one definition and not the other, anything like that, if there's a misconnection, that they'll actually notice that it doesn't make sense. And then finally, we hope our students reach some level of independence. A lot of our kiddos are great about responding as soon as you prompt them and nudge and say, ooh, wait, it actually is this. They'll say whatever it was you prompted them to, but we want them to do that without the nudge. We want them to get to a place where they can function by themselves. So briefly, most of our students come to us when they are not tracking on the good old K12 pipeline. This is built around the idea that after each year of school, the students progress a certain year's worth in their skills. We start to see deviation, and the longer it goes, the bigger that gap may be. We see students hopefully to close that gap. It is always easier when the gap is narrower, but that's not always the case. Sometimes everybody seems to know there's something going on, but it isn't until 6th grade they finally get the diagnosis. That's okay. It makes it a bit of a more uphill climb because we then have to close a wider gap there, but it is doable. And a lot of the times, what we're going to call success is not fast forwarding that student up to grade level and beyond, although that happens plenty. It's more making sure we can get them to a place where they can actually partake in the conversation. They can get a little bit of independence, because that alone is enough to save their confidence. They don't necessarily need to feel that they can do every piece of the work, but if they can start to see themselves do some of it, that alone is a huge piece of success that they may have been lacking for years and years. All right, so I've sort of been speeding along to this right here. This is the best way Lindamood Bell knows how to talk about processing information. We've called these a few different things. We've got the reading circles, a paradigm of integration. What we want you to get from that is these are the underlying pieces that let you read and comprehend. Now, we've got them drawn out here all by themselves and kind of in the big comprehension circle, because comprehension is the goal. If you're reading or you're listening to the teacher in class, comprehending whatever it is, that's why you're there. That's what you're doing. The way you get to that is by using your phonemic awareness, your symbol imagery, to auditorily perceive some language. If you're reading to yourself quietly or in your head, you're still seeing the words come out, but you're having to attack any word that you don't know. So this is where everybody starts. So we're going to sound out. We're going to know that this says that. Oh, wait, maybe it's this, and work it out. We want you to get to a place where you only need to visually process words, and that's just the change from sounding out to sight words. There's a big increase in fluency once your sight words are kicked in and you've got them. So this is where word recognition really takes over. A lot of our students will work just in these circles because that's what's lacking for them. Those are the kiddos that sound out everything, take minutes too long to read it, but they still comprehend like you wouldn't believe. And you're like, how did you get all of that? That sounded awful. Those are students we can talk about another time. If you want to talk about those kiddos, come see us another time. This main presentation is going to be kiddos who really struggle here with language, because this is the place where all of that gets meaning. Any one of us could just sit through and read pages out of the phone book, so-and-so John Smith at this number, at this address. We could read it easily. It would be tedious, boring, and we wouldn't know anything from it if you quizzed us unless we saw somebody we knew. Because it's once we have imagery, oh, I know him. Oh, I live down the street from her. Then it actually carries a meaning, and it can spark something in you that was not there before. So when we talk about contextual reading or vocabulary, it's not just knowing the material, it's being able to image the material. Because without it, you could read through it all day long, but not pick up anything. These are the students who may have to read something 4 or 5 times before anything sticks. It's not about sticking. It's about actually knowing what to picture to match the words. So all of those guys factor into comprehension. And so our students, most often than not, have some sensory cognitive function that's not pulling their weight. We do that evaluation James was talking about to figure out which one it is. Sometimes it's all of them. And we work from there. So we're trying to really pinpoint what's going sideways for the student and try to get them back on track. So if we know that sensory cognitive functions are the very first dominoes, we need to get those established first. Doing anything else, i.e. a lot of tutoring just on homework, that's going to be good to keep the grades up. It's not going to be good to really get the student doing this better on their own. So processing language is a cognitive act. For everyone here, it's probably such a well-established automatic cognitive act. You don't have to put brain power to it anymore. But for a lot of students, that's what we mean by cognitive act. You've got to really think about what you're reading. You've got to really apply your mental muscles to get it done. They're still struggling to make it automatic for them, and that's really, really tough. So what we thought, we being Nancy and Pat, I've just come in the last 6 years or so, instruction in language and literacy should match a theory of cognition. If we're in agreement that there's that much brain to this act, we need something that will explain it. So these are just some quotes. I'm not going to go through and read all these. Feel free to pick them up. But we've seen voices throughout history that harp on how important imagery is to understanding. Everybody from Greek philosophers to composers, everybody has this great ability to visualize their specialty. And what we see a lot is if you like a certain thing, if you are a student who just loves marine biology, they will tell you about dolphins until you cannot take it anymore. But it's the one thing that they've got imagery for, and they feel comfortable with it, so they will roll in it, they will love it. That's kind of what we have, but we need that ability to image to be so strong everywhere, not just dolphins, not just monster trucks. We need it everywhere. If we can get them to do that, they're going to really see their world open up. All right, so dual coding theory is actually the theory of mind that Nancy and Pat kind of came to. Dr. Alan Pavio is a Canadian neuroscientist, and fun fact, was also Mr. Universe in 1960-something, so he is quite the man. And he really kind of pinpointed it for us. So his theory here is that dual coding theory means you need two types of code to be a good processor. You need the static code, which is symbols, so all of the alphabet, anything that's not going to change on you, you know that this will always say that sound and so forth. And then you need a dynamic code. This is something that needs to be alive and changing. This is the movie that plays while you read. If you've ever had your favorite book ruined by Hollywood and you're just like, doggone it, there was no beard on that character, she was not a redhead, and he was not 8 feet tall. Their picture did not match what you pictured during your reading. And sometimes it's for the better, most times it's for the worse. But the point is, we should have both kinds of imagery and both codes going at all times. The silent partner, as Dr. Pavio likes to call it, is that dynamic code, being able to make pictures for what you're reading or hearing. All right, so we talk about Lance and Michelle quite often as they kind of bookend our spectrum for processing language. Lance was struggling heavily with this symbol imagery. He could comprehend if you read it to him, but could not read it on his own. We're going to spend more time talking about Michelle here because Michelle, she could read like the wind. However, it took her 8 times before she could answer a question. Michelle, to be honest, did not have a true diagnosis of autism. She was probably closer to an Asperger's diagnosis, but she was a real-life past student, and at the time, it just wasn't as often diagnosed. So we believe now she probably would have gotten a diagnosis had they pursued it, but at the time, they did not. All right, so let's learn a little bit about Michelle and her state of affairs here. She was 17, she was in 12th grade, but she was about to not be able to graduate because she was missing so many credits. She was very soft-spoken. She did not like to meet your eyes. She had a very flat affect, so even if you told her the funniest joke you heard, she wouldn't give you much of a response. And she really felt pretty terrible, and there are a lot of you thinking, I know so many that sound just like that. Michelle's kind of a classic case. What we see when we look at our testing for Michelle, we gave her a battery where we're going to look at reading, comprehension, the works for us. Her auditory comprehension test, she's at 100. That's not necessarily can she understand the material, it's can she hear the right sounds in the right order. Her word attack, word rec, paragraph reading, spelling, above 12th grade level. All right, so she's got college level skills as far as the reading and the spelling goes. That is awesome, that's wonderful. Why could she possibly be failing? Well, her comprehension is at the 9th percentile. So in a line of 99 students, Michelle is at the very tail end in front of only 8 more students. She is far, far from being able to communicate effectively about what she just read, much less understand it. So her silent reading comprehension is 10th percentile, and oral directions is at the 9th. So whereas for a student like Lance, you could read it to him, Lance will get by. That's good. It's still tough, but it's better than this, because now you can't even read it to her because she can't process it orally either. So she's stuck literally between being unable to read it herself or have it read to her. What would you possibly do? How could you reach Michelle if you've got 20-something other students who all need to graduate their senior year? So this is a quick bit about Mark. They kind of slipped this in recently. So Mark doesn't have near as much backstory, but what we want to get you to notice here is that many students can have super high percentiles scores in so many things, but still struggle with comprehension. And it's not very clear in the slide, but we see even Mark, being as gifted as he is in so many areas, had such low comprehension. And we're not going to spend too much time talking about Mark because he just doesn't have as much up there. But we see Mark being 9 and in the 4th grade struggling in similar ways as Michelle. So both kids were struggling with this one kind of issue. And this is probably something that you're all familiar with, saying, I tell him, goes in one ear, comes out the other. It's a very, very common phrase, but for people like Michelle, it's almost exactly what's happening, because as they hear information or they read it for themselves, they only get parts. Getting that Gestalt doesn't happen because they do not have imagery for everything. If you want to visualize watching a movie, but then we block out half the screen or we focus in on this little shiny bit over here and then we go up there, that's all you're going to get. Would you be able to retell the story? Probably not, just because you don't have that Gestalt. All right, so the Gestalt allows you to understand the main idea, get a conclusion, make an inference. Was it a good idea that they do that? What do you think might happen next? Critically write 5 sentences in response to the story. Those are very hard things if you barely understand what the story is about. So you need to have imagery to really get the meat of the story. All right, so I'm not going to talk about these too much, but these are a lot of the real world scenarios outside of school, outside of the classroom, where not having enough concept imagery fails you. It's getting, lost without the GPS to tell you exactly where to go. It may not be getting the joke and having to laugh just because you see everybody else laughing. There's so many social pieces that concept imagery help with, knowing boundaries, knowing when it's not okay to sit on somebody's lap, knowing it's not okay to hug quite that hard. All of those things can be just grounded in knowing concept imagery, because it comes to, well, that can't be a good idea because of X, Y, and Z. If you can't image forward, you can't understand why it wouldn't be a good idea. This is another reason why one of my favorite students, who I used to work at a YMCA and it was far before at Lindamood Bell, he came into the office, he was very upset, his counselor was there, and he was not getting pool time, so he was extra upset about that. But his counselor says, well, Mr. Ben, we were doing really well, and Ethan was having a great day, and then we hit a wall. And he just blew up because he thought she was kind of tattling on him and saying that he hit a wall and literally did damage to something at the YMCA. And she didn't really mean to, but he took it so literally that he got upset because he thought she was lying about him. Not being able to use figurative language in that way, it's concept imagery. Not knowing why the joke's funny, concept imagery. Okay, so we're getting to how we tackle concept imagery. I mentioned a slide before where you saw sensory input, monitoring, self-correct, independence. This is how we stimulate sensory input so that a student will start using it. Many kiddos have it, and it's sort of hit and miss. Some of them seem like they don't have it at all, and we got to build them from the very ground up. It's talking about what you picture for an object or a word rather than just asking, what does it mean? So it's more important to stimulate concept imagery by saying, what do you picture for the black and white cat? Because I don't want the student to just say, well, it's a cat, it's black and white. I want to hear, its face is black and its ears are black, but it's got a white body and it's got black feet and a tail. I can picture all of that. I can picture that. And wait, show me how big it is. Okay, it's this big. If we can get concrete imagery from the student, we're doing great. We're definitely making sure they're comprehending and connecting the word to the image. All right, so we're going to fast forward past Mark into Michelle. So Michelle, she ended up doing just over about 90 hours of instruction. Average time for her students, 100 hours. We break that up over 5 weeks and do 20-hour weeks. It's very intensive. It is kind of like you can call it a brain boot camp, you can call it whatever you want, but just know that it's a big deal, and it is a intensive jump because we don't want to take 6 months or a year to try to make up lost time. We want to get it done quick so they can get back out of our center and into the classroom so they can start getting some more good curriculum. Michelle did just like I said, about 90 hours of the Visualizing Verbalizing program. Her reading and silent reading comprehension scores jumped not only from the 9th percentile down here, but just about to the 50th, which is almost right where we wanted her to be. It's great when you get above 50th percentile and you're working above your age or grade level, but getting that much of a jump means you just came from not having a clue to being able to do it, having a chance. Things won't be necessarily easy across the board, but you can do it for maybe the first time in a long time, which is huge. So let's see. All right, so here are some other results. So of this particular graph that we're looking at here, this is about 2,400 students, average grade level being 5th, and they all did on average 100. Some are different from those pieces of information, but on average, that's who we're looking at here. So most of these students, you can see, were pretty good at when it came to actually reading. Word attack, 70th, word recognition, 70th percentile. So they're actually pretty good at the reading and the spelling. Their fluency, right where we want it to be, right about 50th, 47th percentile. But man, comprehension, just outside the normal average range for most of them. But to nearly double that and then get right there to an average working range, smack dab around 50th percentile, it's huge. And you see that it wasn't necessarily because of these guys. These did not improve. We did not have to make them better readers to make them better comprehenders. We had to focus on the actual lack of concept imagery to get them really where they needed to be. We also saw nice jumps in oral directions, being able to follow oral language just as much as we're able to read, and then saw some vocab start picking up as well. So this is the same data, just represented in a different way. So if you're big on statistical significance, this is kind of cool, because what we see is that purple means a large change. Well, a large change is anything over 4.5. Well, we had double that amount when it came to a comprehension gain. So if purple is large, I kind of joke that we should have picked a fourth color to be extra large, because this is double the amount that is statistically significant. It really means a lot if you target exactly what's going wrong for these students. So by doing so, you can make a huge impact. All right, I think I'm doing okay. So now I'm getting to the UAB Lindamood Bell research study. So we did this program, this visualizing and verbalizing program for students on the autism spectrum. The idea was that we would see change in their ability to connect with language and connect with written material. We worked with Dr. Khanna, Dr. Murdaugh, and the Department of Psychology, and this little machine right here was kind of all what it was about. We wanted to see differences in their ability to process inside the brain, so we had to get an MRI involved. So this is some of the language from the study, but the idea is that by using the MRI machine, we would be able to see change after instruction. Okay. All right, so we were looking for functional connectivity. We wanted the communication in language areas of the brain to light up while they were doing the MRI study. So this meant you had to do a few specific things. So when we get to the sample sizes and you see, that's kind of small, we had to be very specific. We couldn't take any lefties because you couldn't write and do stuff in the MRI machine because you bang up against it. So we had to be very specific about who went into the study. And if you can imagine an MRI or know what it's like to be in one, it is enclosed. You cannot move. It is also loud. So I want you to envision how many times we got a potential student into the machine only to find out this isn't going to work. This family may have just flown across country. So one of the other kind of funnier parts is that after a while, we realized we needed to prep the parents and the students, and so they would send you a notice saying, practice for the MRI. How do we do that? You zip them in a sleeping bag, you put headphones on them, and you tell them not to move for 20 minutes. If they can do that, we'll try the MRI. I can only imagine how that went, but I'm sure it saved a few people a good plane ride and all of that too. But we did get enough students. We did the study, and I'm kind of fast forwarding to here. There we go. So this was our sample size. So we had an experimental group and the control. The experimental went through the 10 weeks of instruction, and they had the phase 1 MRI scan. In between 10 weeks, so not just 100 hours, but 200 hours of visualizing and verbalizing, which is a large chunk of time. We don't really recommend more than 10 to 12 weeks at a time because after so much instruction, we need to reevaluate just to see where we are and where the student's gone, because that's a huge investment in time for them, and that's definitely going to have some changes. And then at the end of the 10 weeks, we do another MRI scan. So it's very much a before and an after to see what's happened. All right, so that says everything I did, or everything I was just saying. One of the tests we used, if you're wondering about what test, it was a lot of the Gore test, gray oral reading test. It's one of the ones we used in our evaluation, one of our battery. It was administered by UAB. So you have a picture for the instruction, 4 hours of VV, 5 days a week for 10 weeks. So when I say intensive, I truly mean intensive. We did not string the 200 hours out any more than we had to. And I'm happy to say that's what we do for all our students, just as intensively. So here's the changes on the Gore Comprehension score. The experimental group saw a 16.4% change, where the control, who did not receive instruction before their scans, saw only a 2.6 percentile change. So you can see this is somewhat significant. By targeting their concept imagery, by doing visualizing, verbalizing, hitting the exact nail on its head, we have this huge change in their ability to comprehend written material. So for those of you interested in the MRI, what it looks like, we've got Broca's area, and this is, I do not have a neuroscience background, so this is largely my extent to my knowledge here. Broca's area is where our language connects to a lot of things. This was us, this was them rather, before we did the instruction. 10 weeks later, not only is the Broca's lit up incredibly more, we've got so much more connectivity throughout the brain. We're making connections not only to that word, but to a joke I heard 2 weeks ago, or to a funny story I know, or to a memory I have, because the brain is actually connecting. These scans, that's thermal connectivity, so a hotter brain means a better connected brain, if you want to look at it that way. And it just lit up, you know, almost like the proverbial Christmas tree. It was so great to see and so gratifying to see, okay, this is science telling us something's actually happened inside the child's mind that we've been a part of. So it was truly gratifying for a lot of reasons to see this pan out this way. So the results here, I won't read that to y'all, but essentially by going through this program and specifically targeting language processing and imagery, we made a huge change. Did the student know that their brain was lighting up? No. Did the parent tell me, man, he's so much better connected? No. But they said, he talks so much. He converses with people that he used to not give the time of day, like family members he wouldn't talk to. Or, you know, so-and-so has a boyfriend now. You know, all this kind of stuff that is so great to see that they don't care about the details, but what they see is more life. They see more outside the classroom and inside the classroom benefits to what they did. And it was so cool on our part to be a piece of this journey and have something to have done with that. All right, and that is the end for me. Thank you very much. If you want any information, that's the center number, our email address, and again, to the right of the Christmas tree.